Today we're going to be talking about drawing, painting, all the elusive parts of women in art, and I'm going to be mentioning some anatomy. We're going to be doing some master studies. It's going to be fun. Let's get straight into it. So the first one that I'm going to be doing is just this quick kind of thumbnail sketch of Sargent painting, and it's actually going to illustrate a lot of the anatomical things that I often notice and have learned exist within women versus men. So depending on what you're trying to do, you're going to use some of these tips or not to different extremes. But knowing generally what's happening is going to help you in all sorts of arenas in art. So if we just do a quick sped up thumbnail, you're going to see a lot of the main forms that I refer to later. So I just did this quick thumbnail, and it's going to reveal a lot of things that I want to mention about drawing women specifically. I did this more elaborate sketch a year or so ago of the same painting, but just so we can mess with this one and not, ruin the sketch, I'm going to be showing this. So the first thing you notice with women versus men is the chin size, and let me just zoom in a little bit here. So for men, when you're drawing the general contour of their face, they have a much wider lower jaw, and that means that this is going to look pointed and this is going to look more square. So you can notice immediately if we just make a basic outline of a face, that looks much more masculine. And then of course you can put in the cheekbones and everything, but you can tell that that's much more masculine versus feminine would be more slanted in and then a rounder. Everything on the feminine form is much more round. So that's one of the main things, because the actual lower jaw of the skull is just so much thinner. And you can see that if we draw a little skull here, you can see that the actual lower jaw is way thinner. So this would be a female skull, generally speaking. And there's a lot of other anatomical skull differences we're going to go over that actually make women look more feminine and men look more masculine. And of course, when you're doing a portrait study, you're going to have a figure who has more androgynous features, although they're obviously probably going to veer on one side or the other. But knowing what kind of makes up these features and what makes people look more feminine or masculine is going to help you exaggerate the certain things you want to. And the best way that you can actually see exaggeration is through an illustrator's work. So if you look at cartoons, and I'm going to show some right now, of women versus men, you're going to see that they exaggerate a lot of differences like this. There's generally speaking, you're not going to see a lot of men with this thick of a jaw, but you're going to see men generally with a more thick jaw than women. And because there's that slight sort of difference, illustrators can exaggerate that, and you can as well. And when you're doing it realistically, you're obviously not going to make it cartoony and too exaggerated, but to do it to its slight extent is really going to give you a lot of power. So one of the tricks that I see a lot of masters use when they're trying to accentuate the feminine feature is using the hair to frame the face in a positive light. So women tend to have these higher cheekbones, especially with proper facial architecture. They tend to have these higher cheekbones. And what that causes is the higher the cheekbone, the slimmer the chin looks. And because everything's so relational in art, the bigger the cheekbones and the wider they are, generally the more attractive the face is. So if we just play with some measurements real quick. You can see that this would be quite a wide face. And just as a little thumbnail there, you can see that the wider the cheekbones and the more pronounced they are, the thinner the chin looks. And obviously, I should have made this chin a little smaller, but as a little thumbnail, it explains my point. And you'll see that a lot of artists, especially Frazetta, really take this to the next extreme. And what this does is that, since relationally, just like having smaller waist makes men's shoulders look broader, or for women having a smaller waist makes their hips look bigger, all these sort of things are proportional, and keeping that in mind for the architecture of the face, it can help you actually accentuate different things in your portraiture. And you can see that Frazetta, who used to be an illustrator and worked a lot in the extreme, we can learn a lot of lessons from him, because what he would do is he would take his lessons from illustration, which were in more of the extreme, obviously, and then he'd actually apply them to his more realistic paintings. And what was so brilliant about him is that he would actually take the cheekbones right here and he'd drape the hair over, and he'd do this a lot. I'll show you some photos on the right here. He'd drape the hair over, and what that would do, he'd usually have some crazy hair going on or something, but what that would do is that it would make the cheekbones look so much more pronounced just as a shape. And that was a very powerful technique. He'd do that all the time. And you can see Sargent's even doing this to like a minor extent. You can see that the hair actually covers up some of this cheek. And when you slim down, just like we saw here, when you slim down the actual silhouette, the contour of the face, it looks more feminine. So if you can somehow move the hair in front of the face a little bit, it tends to feminize the figure. Now, another thing that you'll see often, and I'll show you some of my sketches here to illustrate, just of Sargent's work and maybe some Philip Deleuze might be in there. The way that you actually light your women is also critical. So you can see here, maybe not, looks like the light's in the way. I'll just do this. So you can see here, just as using this painting again, the lighting of the woman is not very harsh. And that's a very critical thing. So you see a lot of beginners using this very harsh lighting. And harsh lighting is good for describing form. And it's also easier to draw. And generally speaking, it looks better on almost all subjects. But on women, you're going to want the darkest darks and lightest lights, using her face as mostly in the light, and then the background as the darks. Don't try to use the internal shapes of her face, dark and light. Otherwise, it's going to be a little too harsh. Because a lot of what feminizes the figure and makes it look aesthetically pleasing is having the subtlety of form. And when you have the subtlety of the form, and I'll show some Frank Frazetta's work, when it looks like the form is very, very, not very concave, and the whole face is kind of just gently curving instead of more, exaggerated, it makes the face look a lot better. So when you use less harsh lighting, it makes all of their features less pronounced, and that generally looks more aesthetically pleasing. You can see, he always does the same exact lighting, where it's just a little bit on the nose, but most of it's in light, maybe sometimes on the temple and the cheekbone area. In side plane of the face, you'd have some darkness, but it's not like the Rembrandt lighting. He would never do something like that. Yeah, like, look, you wouldn't really want to do this for a female, and this is a Velasquez study, but you can see how just the lighting is a lot harsher, This is a Deleuze, just a quick one I did, and you can see the same thing. Deleuze obviously took after Sargent. He was known for almost being his successor in a sense. And, he was doing the same lighting technique, so don't make it too harsh. Here's another one, Lady Agnew, one of his most famous paintings. Same exact thing. You have that side plane lighting, and then you have just the nose, and you get this nice soft curve right in there from the top of the socket of the eye right down into the bridge of the nose, and it creates this interesting, beautiful kind of gestural shape, but it also doesn't really make the face look too harsh. Same exact thing you can see here. It was just one in class, but same lighting. And you can see, like, if you are doing men, you can have half the face in shadow, and it doesn't look poor, It actually looks pretty good, because generally, to make men look more masculine, maybe I'll make a different video on this, but you want those harsher features. So, another thing to keep in mind when you're drawing women, and maybe you're trying to idealize them or change them up a bit, is the shape of the nose. So if you look at like a 3/4 view of a female, and my imaginative drawing skills aren't the best, but it'll illustrate the point. When you have the nose, you want to make it a nice gentle curve like that. You don't want the Roman's nose, generally speaking. It's a little more unattractive when you have that bump, or it's more pronounced. What you want is this nice, long, more sensual curve all the way, from the bridge all the way down to the nose. And that generally makes things look a lot better. Another thing that I found interesting was the way that you actually place the eyebrow. So I'm gonna give myself some more room here. If you have the eye socket, you know, and then you place the eye in there, you're gonna want the eyebrow to be a little bit higher up, and not super high up, but thinner and higher up generally makes the eye look bigger because you have this proportional relationship. And you'll see, I'll put up some Sargent paintings. The eyebrows are very high up above the eye, which is actually the natural anatomical position that you see on women. But what it does is that it makes the eye look bigger proportionally. But if you have, like you're trying to make the eye look more masculine, then you can bring down the eyebrow a bit and just really, you know, accentuate it, make it much bushier, and that looks more like a man's eyebrow. It makes the eyes look smaller proportionally, that's also why. Because another interesting thing about the male versus the female skull is that people think the eyes are bigger. The eyes aren't bigger, the head is smaller, but the eyes remain the same size. So again, everything's just very relational. Now you can actually see a lot of the things that I've been talking about in this study, and I'm gonna place it obviously right next to it. But if you look at the nose, it has that long curve. If you look at the chin, it has that nice pointy thing coming down from the jaw. And the other interesting thing is that the jawline actually makes the figure look more feminine, more masculine, and the same reason as why from the profile it has that pointier look, like that or that, versus men have a more broader look. And it's because the jaw in profile, if we look at it, so we look at that like very basic skull right there. You can see that the sharper the jawline, the more masculine it looks. So if we go, and it's never going to be 90 degrees, by the way, that's a common mistake, but that looks more masculine versus if we just erase that and then we bring it forward just a touch. And these things are really subtle, so you don't have to overdo it like an anime. But you can see that looks a little more feminine, right? And that's why in the side profile, you tend to have a smoother sort of, you know, jaw. If I was trying to make this one look more masculine, then you'd get in that straighter jaw right here. And then you'd bring it down. And you can see that's already starting to masculinize the figure. Now the other thing is that women's facial features tend to change a little bit. So if you have the lips are a little bit fuller and it's shorter. Whereas for men, their lips are less full. So everything's just kind of the same, but less exaggerated. But they tend to be wider and a little bit longer. So that's important to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is the brow of women tend to be less pronounced as well. So if we do a little Bridgman skull study, if you have a man's skull, you have these two kind of horns, is one way to explain it, but it's just this kind of bump on the skull, and it makes the forehead look like it has this round sort of plumpy bump on it. And if you look up some skulls, you'll see this very subtly, but Bridgman of course exaggerates it a lot. So let's say like the skull would stop right here. You could really exaggerate it and have this bowl shape on top of it. And that's what creates this rhythm that you see in Riley's abstraction of the face, where if you go from the eyes and then you go up through the skull, it creates this kind of circle. And that's what's actually kind of causing it, is a combination of that and also the brow, which we talked about a little bit earlier. But having these two parts of the skull more pronounced is going to make the face look more masculine. So if you make the forehead subtler and softer, and generally just void of any of these details, then it's going to make the skull look a lot more feminine, and the face in turn as well. Now I'm going to do this final head study of Frazetta just to illustrate my points that I made throughout this video, and you're going to see just how many of these actually come up when you're describing the female form. So I'm gonna have to cut a lot of the image out and crop it, because Frazetta was known for, you know, drawing whatever he wanted to. So we're just gonna put the face here, but hopefully you're gonna see a lot of these techniques that I talked about. She looks a little disheveled in this painting, obviously, because there's some sea monster after her or something. He's always known for being dramatic. But anyway, so you can see that a lot of the same techniques that I talked about exist here. You have the pointy chin, you have the jaw that instead of going down like a masculine jaw would go like that, it comes in at an angle like this, and then it goes down smoother. So it's more of an obtuse angle. You'll see that especially in women. And you see these high cheekbones, and the cheekbones generally make this shape. And Frazetta always kind of exaggerated that, where you'd make the cheekbones really pronounced, because that generally shows a more developed, healthier face, in which, health and attraction are almost synonymous. So, and then we also see here, he would describe the form of the face using the hair. So because the side plane comes in like this, and then we have the cheekbone area, and it kind of comes in like that, you have this plane change right here. You can see that. And then of course the brows go in like that. And this is what Bridgman obviously taught Frazetta, is to break things down to these simple sort of blocky shapes, and then from there you can build all your wildest imaginative ideas. But you have this entire side plane here, and the hair just goes loose after that. And that's like, this is really what Frazetta was doing here, is that he would break down the face shape into these simple forms that you see in the Bridgman book, and then from there he could actually build on the facial features. And you can see also on Frazetta, just like I was talking about earlier, with the subtlety of the forms, not making all of them too pronounced. You have the nose that almost is non-existent. That's typical in illustration for women, because generally the more pronounced the nose is, like right here, this looks more like a masculine nose. You want less pronounced of a nose, and it'll make the face look a little more feminine. And then you can also see the way that he shaded the figure was really interesting on this one, because he would just give the whole thing a little bit of shade right here. And that shows this kind of, like when it's curling over here, it's not this abrupt plane change that you'd see with men. It's this super soft, kind of subtle, gradient that you get. And same thing with even the cheekbones, is none of it's harsh. And because in the female form especially, you want to make everything seem very soft and subtle. Whereas for men, you can just go all out and make it super harsh and stuff, and that'll actually look better if you do that. Again, I'll talk more about it in my men video that I make later. But yeah, and then you also have the smaller mouth, the more accentuated lips. And when you're drawing like this at such a small scale, which a lot of Frazetta's paintings actually were, this particular one that I have up right now, super small painting. You can even see the canvas weaving in certain pictures you take of it. You don't really need to show all the anatomical things. Like, you don't need to show the whole Cupid's bow or anything like that. As long as you have the general shape correct, your audience is actually just going to forgive you. Because at a certain distance, when you see people, you don't see all those details of the face. All you see is the large masses, which like this is really what's important from a distance, right? And getting these sort of shapes correct is really what feminizes or masculinizes your figure. And just to show you how critical this mass is, you can actually create something that looks like a face from these three simple shapes. And depending on the shapes that you make from this, that's gonna really be key to how people see your drawings. So you can see that this would look more like a man, and here's where the brow goes from those three shapes. And this is all in the Bridgman book. But you have, your eye socket there. And you can see how those three forms just create more of a masculine face, right? But if we actually build the face based on these three shapes, it goes in more like this, then that's going to create a much more feminine face. And that's what Frazetta did here, right? Just more three-dimensionally, because it's less of a front-on. You never really want like a direct front-on portrait. It can look good if you're Sargent, but in order to actually describe the form better and get away with small asymmetries. If you have it just slightly off balance where you can see just, you know, just like it's not 3/4, but it's getting there, you know. Frazetta would do that a lot. It just shows the form a lot better, and people will just understand what you're saying, you know, because all art is just articulation. But it really helps when you do it that way. And then of course he was using, you know, the hair here. So anyways, there's lots more to go over, but this video is getting pretty long, so I'm just gonna keep it at that. I hope you guys learned something. Let me know in the comments what you want to learn next, or any of your pressing comments or, you know, concerns. And I hope you all have a beautiful day. Thanks for watching, and go make something beautiful. See you later.